In 1720, a single man was, on paper, the richest private citizen in the history of the world. He controlled France's national bank, its currency, its taxes, and all of its trade with the entire globe outside of Europe. Kings asked him for favors. He had, quite literally, invented a new kind of money, and used it to make an entire nation rich almost overnight. Within months, he was fleeing France in disguise. In the dead of night, his fortune seized, his name a curse. He would die 9 years later, alone and broke, gambling to survive in a cold room in Venice. Between those two moments sits one of the most astonishing financial disasters ever recorded. The first time in history a country tried to print its way to paradise, and it was all set in motion by a convicted killer who had escaped from prison and talked his way into running the finances of a kingdom. How does one man convince an entire nation to abandon gold for paper and then watch it all collapse in a matter of weeks? This is the story of the very first paper money bubble, the original. Every crash since, every printing spree, every speculative mania is in some way an echo of what happened in France 300 years ago. By the end, you'll understand the single idea that made it possible and the single decision that destroyed it. Our story begins with a kingdom in crisis. By the time the old French king died in 1715, France was effectively bankrupt. Decades of war and royal extravagance had left the crown buried under a mountain of debt it could never hope to repay. The man now running the country on behalf of the boy king, the regent, the Duke of Orléans, was desperate for a solution, any solution. Enter John Law, a Scotsman, a brilliant mathematician with a gift for probability, honed at the gambling tables of Europe, where he'd won and lost fortunes. He was also a fugitive. He had killed a man in a duel in London, been sentenced to death, and escaped from prison to flee to the continent. But Law was not just a gambler. He was a genuine economic visionary, decades ahead of his time, and he carried one radical, dangerous idea. Law believed that a nation's wealth wasn't limited by how much gold and silver it physically held. He argued that a country could create paper money, backed by trust and by the nation's future potential, and that this paper could spark trade, fund industry, and generate real prosperity. Today, this is roughly how every economy on Earth works. In 1716, it was almost heresy. Money was gold. Gold was money. The idea that you could simply print prosperity sounded like magic, or madness. The desperate regent listened, and he decided to let this fugitive gambler test his theory on the entire French economy. In 1716, Law opened a private bank with the right to issue paper banknotes. And at first, his theory worked beautifully. His notes were convenient, trusted, and, crucially, accepted for paying taxes, which gave them real value. Trade picked up, the economy stirred back to life. Law was hailed as a genius, so the regent handed him more power. His bank became the official state bank, the Banque Royale, its notes now guaranteed by the crown itself. Then came the masterstroke. Law created a company, the Mississippi Company, and granted it a monopoly over trade with France's vast, supposedly gold-rich colonial territory in North America, the Mississippi Valley. He then bundled in the trade rights to China, the East Indies, and beyond, until his company controlled nearly all French trade with the entire non-European world. He offered shares in this company to the public, and he connected everything into a single machine. You could buy shares in the company using his bank's paper notes. The promise was intoxicating. Untold riches waiting across the ocean, and a simple piece of paper to buy your way in. The public didn't just believe, they went mad. What happened next was one of the first speculative frenzies in history, and here is the part that reframes the whole disaster. The Mississippi Company was, in reality, barely making any money. The colonial territory was mostly swamp and wilderness, not the mountain of gold everyone imagined. The company's actual profits were almost nothing, and yet its share price exploded anyway, because people weren't buying a business, they were buying a belief. Shares that started around 500 livres rocketed past 1,000, then 5,000, then 10,000, and beyond. rising nearly 2,000% in under a year. The value had completely detached from anything real. It was floating entirely on confidence. That's the trap almost no one saw. The price wasn't rising because the company was succeeding. It was rising because the price was rising. People bought because others were getting rich, which pushed it higher, which pulled in more buyers. The whole thing was a mirror reflecting a mirror. And a machine built purely on belief has a terrifying property. The moment belief wavers, there is nothing underneath to catch the fall. The word millionaire was reportedly coined in these very streets, to describe the ordinary people suddenly made unimaginably rich. Servants, coachmen, shopkeepers, all of them were pouring their savings in, and all of them, on paper, were getting rich. But keeping the dream alive required something poisonous. To keep share prices climbing, buyers needed more money to buy with, so Law's bank simply printed it. More paper notes flooded out to fuel the buying, which drove share prices higher, which made everyone want in, which required still more printed notes. This was the fatal loop. Law was now printing paper money and using it to inflate the value of a company that barely earned a profit. By early 1720, his bank had issued more than double the amount of paper money than there was gold and silver in all of France to back it. And that paper had to go somewhere. As all this new money washed through the economy, the price of everyday things, bread, rent, clothing, began to climb sharply. The paper prosperity was quietly becoming paper inflation. The machine was running hotter and hotter, and a few sharp observers began to do the math. They realized that all this paper wealth could never be turned back into real gold. There simply wasn't enough gold in existence. And quietly, the smartest of them started heading for the exit. It started with a trickle. A couple of prominent nobles quietly cashed in their shares, converting their paper fortunes into gold coin, and hauling it away. In one famous case, a prince reportedly sent 3 wagons to the bank to cart off his gold. That was the crack. Others noticed. And the terrible question spread through Paris. If this is all just paper, who actually gets the real gold? Because everyone suddenly understood there wasn't enough for all of them. The rush began. Share prices began to fall. And now Law made the single decision that would define the catastrophe, the fatal move. To stop the panic, in May 1720, he issued a decree that officially cut the value of the shares and the banknotes in half. He meant it, to gently let the air out of the bubble. Instead, it was an official admission from the government's own mouth that its money was worth less than it claimed. It shattered the one thing the entire system was built on: trust. The decree was reversed within days. It was far too late. Trust, once broken, cannot be ordered back into existence. Now everyone rushed to convert their paper into gold at once. Crowds besieged the bank in a desperate crush, and in the chaos outside its doors, people were reportedly trampled to death. The bank had nowhere near enough gold. It couldn't pay, and the whole magnificent machine seized and died. The shares that had soared toward 18,000 livres collapsed to a tiny fraction of that, a fall of more than 90%. The paper fortunes evaporated. The coachmen and servants who had been millionaires for a season were poor again, often poorer than before. And John Law, the richest man in the world, fled the country in disguise, exactly where this story began. So was John Law simply a fraud, a con man who fooled a kingdom? This is what makes his story so haunting. He wasn't. Many of his core ideas were genuinely brilliant, so brilliant that they formed the foundation of the modern world. Paper currency, national banks, shares traded by the public, an economy powered by credit and confidence rather than just buried gold. Almost every economy on the planet now runs on the very ideas John Law was destroyed by. He wasn't wrong about the future. He was just fatally early and fatally undisciplined. Because Law's real failure wasn't the idea of paper money, it was that he could not resist printing too much of it. He learned that a currency built on confidence can create miraculous prosperity, and that the exact same mechanism, pushed too far, can vaporize that prosperity just as fast. Paper money gave him the power to conjure wealth from belief. It also gave him the power to destroy it, and he could not stop himself from using both. And that is the lesson that has echoed through every bubble and every currency collapse in the 3 centuries since. Money backed by confidence is the most powerful tool humanity ever invented, and the most dangerous. Because confidence can build a fortune overnight, and confidence, once it cracks, can take it all back just as fast. John Law's experiment ended in ruin, and much of the world recoiled from paper money for generations. But the temptation he unleashed never really went away. The dream of turning belief into riches simply moved, into new companies, new countries, and new schemes, each one certain it had finally found a way to make the impossible math work. And one of the most audacious of them all wouldn't involve a gambler or a king at all. It would be a company that convinced the world it was worth billions, while hiding the fact that it was building almost nothing. But that story belongs to a different century. That's next.